Hello and welcome to our third reading of the National Young Writers Festival 2020, Monsters, Myths and Queers. The history of horror has a long relationship with the queer community, for better or worse. There's lots of queer allegory in horror. Dracula's a bit gay, Carmilla's a bit gay, the Blob is very gay, and a few years ago the Babadook was put on the list of LGBT films on Netflix. And so we thought it would be great to have a reading of stories that dealt with the relationships between queerness and horror, queerness, monsters, myths. And so I don't want to take up too much of your time today, so I'll just throw straight to our writers. The first writer that we have is the fabulous Liam Maguire from Victoria, and I will remove myself and hand over to him. Thank you very much.
Beauty. Thanks, Mike. Hello, everybody. My name is Liam. I am speaking to you from Melbourne, where I'm currently in lockdown. I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which I am currently sitting and have written this poem that I'm about to read for you. I'd just like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations for the traditional owners. And I'd just love to read you this short little poem. This poem that I've written is called Forever Young, in brackets, acoustic cover. And thanks for joining me, guys. It feels very intimate that I'm speaking to you from my room. So hopefully we can really lean into that. For those listening at home, it goes like this. So I have this dream over and over. And I know how you hate to hear about my dreams, or more so, love to tell me how much you hate to hear about my dreams. So I keep it to myself. But it sneaks out in things you do, like taking out the rubbish or picking up the mugs in my room, or smoking a joint on the back lawn where you try to tell me the ways you think you've grown since last November. I see a gay vampire. If he was one of my friends, he would be queer, but he's not. He's the gay vampire in my dreams and also in my waking life. A vampire that gives more than he takes, but takes nonetheless. Gives me labels and Uber Eats and cocaine, and drinks my blood. It's worth it. I might not live forever, but I'll live rich and high on cocaine. And I don't know what other superpowers vampires have, except being polite when they come to the door and not seeing themselves in the mirror or something. But I still see you make that face, so you must still see your reflection. And you've never been good at waiting for permission to do anything. It's the thing that gets you so far and also what holds you back. Like a stage mum I never had, pushing me into the spotlight for the low price of perpetual adolescence. You are someone I love, I think. I'm unresolved, half dead. This relationship is half dead. How pessimistic. A vampire is also half alive. I wish it was just split down the middle, so I could walk hand in hand down the street with my better half's better half, while the other half of his vampiric half-dead body dragged limp and dead on the street beside us. This relationship is half dead, undead, re-deaded, since we brought it back to life after a 2-month intermission. On again, off again sounds so cute and charming until you realize the energy it uses. Turning off our kitchen light only saves energy if it's going to be off for 5 minutes before you turn it back on, because the energy required to light it up in the first place is the real killer. I am the real killer. I'm the white guy in the film who is sexy and effortlessly human and will inevitably kill the vampire. I'm the vampire hunter who would prefer to age gracefully than never age at all, though, ironically, the actor playing him fills in his fine lines, represses his sexuality, and got into film acting in the first place so that he'd live on forever. Long after he's dead, he will live on the cover of this Vampire Hunter DVD in the bargain bin at my local Kmart, where someone can buy his likeness for $2.99. Honestly, I'd prefer to be forgotten. And that's the end of my neat little poem. I feel like I'm on love song dedications or something, speaking directly into this mic. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the readings tonight, because I will.
Hello, everyone. Before I start, I'd like to give my respect and solidarity to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who've been caring for the land I live on for many thousands of years. I have not written any new poems since the start of the pandemic, so I apologize if people have heard these before. But luckily, all of my work touches somehow on monsters, myths, or queers. So on that note, this one's called Good Crips Go to Heaven But Get Stuck at the Stairway, after a poem of Queen Eli's. Be bad, love. Take that bad attitude and forge it into armor. Turn chains into chainmail. Take the rage and rancor and make it plated bronze. Brace your joints in bitterness. Blaze apotropaic iron out of acrimony. Glare back at staring eyes. Rebel and revolt. Forget that carceral logic. Be grassroots. Be light and fire. Let your disabled body be fierce and furious. Let your disabled mind be ardent and wild. Wrap steel around your heart and let your heart stay soft. The life you have is a life worth living. Be proud, love. Be loud and unashamed. Fold fear into a shield. Let all of it reflect away. Don't look back. Don't dwell in regret. Let yourself seek redemption without the tragic backstory, without justification or explanation, without what's wrong with you or what happened. Let it happen. Bite the hand. Demand, don't ask. If they care, they'll fight beside you. Piss on pity and inspiration. Reject involuntary martyrdom. Be that transgender menace, that lavender threat. Be damned, love. You're there already. The world is burning. Take hell and make it yours. Be hell on wheels. Be monstrous. Be the bad example, the bad influence, the bad cripple. Be non-compliant. Speak in your own language. Live fast, live strong. Fight for liberation, not assimilation. Remember solidarity, stay strange, keep weird and queer, and always channel anger into action. You are loved and not alone. There is more than this and more to come. Be joyous, my love, be bad. This one's called Circe's Potions. After the surgery, my father is different in inconsequential ways, the same in all important respects. His heartbeat is a little faster now, accommodating the unfamiliar valve, transplanted from a pig. He still eats bacon, is still forgetful, still stubborn, still thoughtless in the way he always was, still lacking in tact or meaningful filter, even more so since the stroke, since he has become concentrated inwards. For myself, we are considering a mechanical heart, because I am younger, because it is expected to last for longer, require more maintenance. My diet, unlike his, will change dramatically, excising alcohol, gaining an additional regime of medication to add to the handful of pills I toss back every morning. Unlike my father, a hybrid of human and swine, I will be a hybrid of human and machine, more like Hephaestus than like Circe's drunken visitors. Seething with honey wine, the vengeful witch queen turned men into pigs, but their essential souls remained the same. This one's to the body unordinary. The doctor cracks jokes, doesn't have that twist to his mouth that I have come to expect, nor the mantle of arrogance while mispronouncing my condition. Doesn't say, maybe you're just anxious. I am anxious, largely due to doctors who neglect the maxim do no harm, parading bigotry as physic, saying, maybe you're overthinking it, or maybe it's my imagination. Who would imagine this, I think? Who the hell would imagine this? I try to imagine something else. A body without pain. A body that walks and stands up without falling over. A body with energy and substance, lacking the curl of dysphoria, intact of cardiac quality, no surfeit of joint laxity, spasticity, fragility, an unabbreviated life expectancy. Correct configurations of serotonin, hypocretin, histamine, appropriate sensory perception. A body that will never know the joy of soaring down the hill. a body that is still, that doesn't spin or sway from side to side or soak up color and light, a body with quiet hands that doesn't contort or fall out of joint, a slow, bipedal, confident body, possessing limited mobility, hands incapable of reaching every inch of skin, requiring aid with sunscreen and back closure zips, and ignorant of all the secret pathways, side entrances, goods and services elevators, hydraulic stair lifts, jacaranda flowers littering the long way round. None of which I explain to the doctor, who says normal in contrast to my body, and then pulls a face, corrects to typical, at which I grin, thinking how boring to be normal, how dull and colourless a life, how little I desire to live in any body but my own. This last one is called Gender of the Night. I love a woman taller than sunbeams, who winks at me in half-light and bends to bestow whiskered kisses beneath my collarbones, then hangs up her gender from a coat hook to sleep, unencumbered by social constructionism, snoring, genderless. My own gender is visible only in certain moonlights, during gibbous phases waning and waxing, determined by tidal season and by the movements of birds flying south for winter. My gender is carried on the north wind through storms and seas, and then falls through our open bedroom window to settle, gently glittering, on my lover's eyelashes, silvered by the moon. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Chloe Allison Escott. I'm here in my bedroom in Hobart. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the Muwinina people, who are the traditional owners of this land. I haven't really written anything for this. I'm just going to tell a bit of a story. Like, it's a story that's partly from my childhood and partly a more, recent investigation of that. So, when Tasmanian millennials or ex-Tasmanian millennials get together, we love to talk about ads, particularly like local ads that were on in the 90s, the early 90s, the golden age of local ads. Stallard's Camera House, Jim's Shopping Oasis, Tasmanian Carpet Cleaning, which had a jingle very heavily based around the phone number 236689, which was then ruined in the mid-90s when they had to lengthen all the phone numbers. And most of all, we like to talk about the Fletcher's ads. Now, Fletcher's was a discount retailer all around Tasmania, discount retail chain, and their ads, there were these animated fairs. Like, the middle part of it would be, that week's specials on condensed milk and instant coffee and laundry detergent and such like. But they had these animations that would play out before and after the specials. And there were two characters. One of them was Fletcher, the titular mascot of Fletcher's, who was a kind of like an Errol Flynn, like swashbuckling hero who would slash prices with his sword. And the other one was Sly, like Sly the Snake. He wasn't a particularly consistent snake. Sometimes he was like a python, kind of squeezing the value out of goods, and sometimes he's more like a cobra, like draining the bargains. But with his fangs. But either way, he was like the villain that Fletcher would always defeat. And I think about, Tasmanians who grew up in the same era that I did, we all think about the Fletcher's ads a lot, but I feel like I think about them more than most. And the question I have, that I've been looking back on this stuff later in life, was Sly, the overpriced retail goods snake from the Fletcher's ads, a queer-coded villain? Some people I've asked say no, it was just someone doing, it was the 90s. They were doing a Scar from the Lion King voice. They were doing a Jafar from Aladdin voice. But the first of these ads aired in 1991, before either of these films. It's an original voice. And has all of the hallmarks looking back as well, being a snake, first of all, like a snake of temptation, trying to tempt uninformed consumers into paying too much for goods, much like the snake that tempted Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It kind of moves and slithers and sidles up to people very seductively in almost a predatory kind of way in the typical queer-coded villain mold. He would make things more expensive, which was a very gay thing to do. And most of all, there was his catchphrase, which would appear at the end of every ad. Fletcher and Sly would do battle somewhere or other on a pirate ship, out in space, on a volcano, and Fletcher would win, and he would say, "Fletcher's, you're home for savings," but then it would cut that the last image of the ad would always be Sly defeated at the bottom of the ocean or floating out in space, saying mournfully, ruefully, "But who will save me?" And that voice stayed with me for a long time. It stayed with me through my teens and through my 20s, and when I was first starting to really come to terms with my queerness and start to try and break through the denial that I always had around that. I would spend night after night sometimes just lying on my bedroom floor looking up at the ceiling as if it was some like higher power and saying through tears, "But who will save me?" And so I've always wondered what the intention was. Was Sly a message to people like me? And if so, what was that message? Was it a message that intended cruelty, or was it a message that intended to communicate something better? And I finally decided to confront this question that I've had for such a long time, and I used my contacts to get in touch with Belinda Fletcher, the daughter of the founder, who I found out was put in charge of the ads. She was in her 20s at the time these ads first aired, and she hadn't heard anybody ask her about these in such a long time. She was happy to answer my questions, and I asked her some things I was curious about, just the animation style, what it was inspired by, and all kinds of things. But I asked her most of all, like, what was the story with Sly? Was Sly queer? Was he a queer villain? I felt like he was speaking to me. Was he speaking to me? And she said, Sly was just based on a real snake. There was a snake that just lived at our first outlet in Devonport, and we just made him one of the characters. He was a real snake. I don't know what I expected. It certainly wasn't that. Sly was just a cartoon representation of a real snake, and we can't project a sexuality onto a real snake. And I asked her about, I asked her some more questions. I asked her about Fletcher. And she said that Fletcher was a more interesting story. She said that around about the time that she was starting to make these ads, she'd been going out with a woman for the first time in her life. She was very much in love with her, but this woman, this first girlfriend of hers, was She didn't want anyone to know about their relationship. She wouldn't introduce her to her parents. She wouldn't be seen with her among friends. And eventually she left and she married a man. And Belinda didn't think that they seemed happy together, that they belonged together. And she resented this man for stealing her girlfriend away from her, and she channeled all of that resentment into Fletcher, who, in hindsight, I can see as just a vicious parody of a heterosexual man. So there you have it. Like, Sly wasn't queer, at least not intentionally, but Fletcher was intensely heterosexual. And I felt this relief wash over me, knowing this somehow, finally having an answer. And then as I was turning to leave, Belinda said, "Would you like to see the snake?" I said, "What?" She said, "Would you like to see Sly? Would you like to meet him?" I said, "What? Do you have him like taxidermy or something?" He said, No, he's in a cage in the other room. You can come and meet him if you want. You mean what? Sly, the snake that lived in the first Fletcher's outlet 30 years ago. She said, yes. But isn't the average snake lifespan like about 10 years? And she said, my father wanted so desperately to keep him alive that he developed an experimental super serum and injected Sly, the snake, with the serum every day of his life. And I continue his legacy. I inject him every day to keep him alive. He's very, very strong and very, very intelligent. And I could barely even process this. I said, sure, I'll see him. And I was led into a room, and there he was. Just as I remember him from the ads, but there he was in the flesh, just coiled in this cage as a king cobra. He looked straight at me, and I said to Belinda, can I just have a moment? Can I have a moment alone with Sly? And she said, sure. And she backed away and closed the door. It was just me, and I looked through the glass into the enclosure at Sly, and Sly looked back at me, and it was as if I could hear his voice again. He looked right at me and said, but who will save me? And I said, I will save you. And I opened the enclosure, and I opened the window, and I watched this 50-year-old, super strong, super intelligent, immortal king cobra slither out the window and out into the world. I hope he's living his best life out there. And in a way, I feel as if I saved myself. Thank you.
Hi. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge and I'd like to thank everyone that performed just before. And I'd also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the rightful and sovereign custodians of the land in which I'm speaking, the Whadjuk people of the Boomban Nation. And I'd like to extend that respect to First Nations elders past and present. I'd like to acknowledge their wisdom, their power, and their love. And also acknowledge that it is through understanding myself as a settler in this land that I know and understand and articulate myself So as well as paying respects, I'd like to give my gratitude and pay thanks as well. My name is Gottlieb. I'm a community artist and writer who lives and works on unceded sovereign lands of the Whadjuk people. I have a migrant settler background with English, Cantonese and Hokkien heritage, and then an ancestral connection to Christmas Island. I couldn't understand myself as queer until I understood that I contained many spirits, and I couldn't hear those spirits until I understood what decolonial work was meant to be doing for all. The gender binary is colonial, the division assists capitalism, disempowers communities, queerness as well, the claiming of the word queerness coming from Queer Nation, an important group in the US that fought for the basic rights of love. That's not decolonial. I am no nation, and I do not wish to be stated or even entirely out of a closet. I belong to many peoples, and I belong to, I guess, like a lineage that's traveled for generations, and where our home is us. Queerness always felt like a white thing, a conception of identity that was individual and about individual desires. But when I was younger, and when I only had my own desires, I didn't understand them as queer. And now that I understand myself as multiracial, I find myself kind of confronted with the word queer as if it's a mirror or like a still pool in the darkness of like cold, that there's a type of confronting with inheritance that comes with this for me. So I guess I never really wanted myself to be haunted. I never wanted to be a ghost. But I guess like the ways in which I've come to this is through that understanding of myself as haunted. And I guess like this understanding came from a story I often say about myself, because I was haunted. I had a type of sleep paralysis, and this kind of story kind of haunts me, the way a tree blooms through a fence or flowers bloom at night. Every night for 6 months I stayed very still, very quiet, and the quietness was in my soul, the stillness was in my heart, and on top of that, my night terror, the psychosis, the hallucination, an angry young girl demon who gifted me nightmares of watching my family throw themselves into fire, being compelled to do so. Nightmares that became real life psychosis, how this ghost, this demon followed me around every day for 6 months, asking to dig her up, dig her out of the yard where she had been murdered and buried. When I think about coming out of a closet, I think about digging her up. When I think about my gender identity, I remember I desperately made a plea with this demon to stop haunting me, and so she walked until she was inside me. She walked until she became, I guess, a type of dragon, and disappeared somewhere in the still caverns of my heart, or as a dragon ate me when I was a butterfly. And I guess like as I come to this understanding of my gender identity as beyond the binary, as my sexuality and my types of desires, I don't see as necessarily individual, but as a type of connection to many, and connected to my cultural identity. And I try to find queerness in the past. I think of a very kind of prominent flower god who was one of the 8 immortals. But I think, as many of us understand, there is no ancient, there is no past. There's just stories, such as the story of an emperor who built a lake from stone, filled the lake with beer, hung meat skewers from the trees, and had an orgy in the lake, drinking and eating. fucking everyone. So it being part of the same kind of racial capitalism, I'm seeking to undoing myself and retying myself and threading myself to communities. A lot of the ways in which I feel like Western societies try to transform themselves from being homophobic to accepting is through a type of homonationalism. And I feel like queer nation, even the name itself. Queer Asia, as you and Leung have argued, is conditioned by the coexistence of market and cultural liberalism and state illiberalism. But I guess I don't really see myself as wanting either. I don't really want free choice or institutionalized queerness. I guess I just want people, beings, to love each other in a complete and full way. Definitely really touched and inspired by Professor Eileen Morton Robinson at Broadside saying that she never wanted to be a feminist because she's not part of that, because her female ancestors made her what she is, not feminism. Feminism, born from Western Enlightenment thinking, is tainted from the beginning, she says, because it wants to distance itself from nature and to disconnect women from nature. Understanding myself as who I am is understanding myself as something that's connected to nature and connected to many. And so I struggle in terms of my own desires. And as Ada Cheng says, the desire, we are all creatures filled with contradictions and inconsistencies, and it's important to simply recognize that. So I recognize that too. I'd like to finish with a poem called Fish Wish, Tukyu. An abundant wave, leaf-locked, gold skin, broken open onto the beach, with face-soaked memories of the sea, which, heavy, loses itself to the earth-locked pockets of drunken poets, swaying in a boat under dark, starry scales of coy longing, moon-lost night like a tongued-out heart, or a sidelong glance into the past tense. Obliteration is a whisper not meant for me, or cobweb guilt in the corner of the sky. I keep guilt all close to my heart, in a red pocket, and lock a year's worth of hope in a day before first moon. Whatever you place on the reunion plate is an intention, just like flowers are an intention to fruit. Let fortune pull pleasure through you, slip into plural, embrace your ancestors, laughing as a he becomes her, becomes they, while the air is silent. And I'd like to read another poem, Dream of Matsupo, which came from a real dream in which I felt like the sea proposed to me, in a very, in the sense that I guess spirit marriages occur in some Chinese cultures. The sky was inside my chest. I wore a red wedding dress. Papa taps my hand, whispers Hanqua into my ear, from which spills the waters surrounding Singapore. And my gung, 13 years old, took a boat to Christmas Island. It was an old sky, crescent blue, a veil of rain passed into memories, a glow on the inside of my eyelid. I was wearing my wedding dress. I was divinely happy. When the moon had almost begun, it was hidden in the daytime sky. My papa wrapped her fingers around mine, around the prayer. My mouth followed the whispers. The sea before me swelled with joy. The other animals emerged, wearing suits of smoke. I kneeled before them in prayer in the sand and felt fire move within me. As I rose, glowing, sand fell onto the face of uncles and aunties. How could you marry the sea, they spluttered. Like this, I whispered, and watched my fingers wrapped in sea foam, sneaking deep into my bodily memory. I guess this is about the constant trying to find deep in my bones the memory that who I am is completely and utterly the expression that I'm meant to be. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Jess. I am coming to you from Wurundjeri land in the Kulin Nation here in Naarm. Originally grew up on Gilgajun land. I just want to acknowledge traditional elders of the lands that I live on and have lived on, and just say that sovereignty was never ceded, that Australia, or so-called Australia, always has and always will be Aboriginal land. Just quick thing before I start my little talk, some content warnings for sex, sexuality, welcome to the queer panel, and excessive use of the word fuck. So if this is a problem for anyone, thanks for coming to this event. Thanks for supporting National Young Writers Festival. Now I shall continue. So I stopped being afraid of monsters when I realized that I wanted to fuck them. Okay, look, I'm not saying that as a 7-year-old I watched the slaying of Medusa scene on an old VHS tape of the 1981 version of Clash of the Titans, though, and thought, like, I want to fuck that snake. No. What I mean is that I know the point of the whole lesbian vampire trope was that cis straight man kills the bad seductress at the end so the ingenue would be saved from a life of debauchery instead and live the rest of her days in hetero bliss. So I know that, and I decided that instead I'm just incredibly gay for beings who can seem like they can actually just bore me. Like, it's kind of comforting to know that the only ethical consumption under capitalism is having some sort of monster completely swallow you whole. And knowing that I'm okay with that. Like, for this event, I was playing around with the prompt. I was tossing about this idea of maybe writing a short listicle of all the monsters I've wanted to fuck before, or maybe I was going to write my dream monster threesome, like me pegging Cthulhu while the monster under the bed watches and Medusa offers soft aftercare afterwards. But it would be a really lovely revolving door of extra appendages, cloacas, and a gratuitous amount of foreplay. But it just wasn't coming to me. Pun not intended. Real talk, when I say I'm a monster fucker, I mean that I'm tired of swiping right on the sexy singles in my area. I want a woman with scaled skin and fangs and a small blood kink for once. I'd fuck any consenting monster, really, from Cthulhu to your typical anime cat girl. I'd have an erotic dalliance with nearly anything, a xenomorph from Aliens, a minotaur, and I'm not alone, because for as long as monsters have been around, people have been thinking about boinking them. And I realize right now some people watching might be uncomfortable with that fact. I guess I'm not supposed to want to fuck these beings. I'm just supposed to look at humans and go, sure, cool. Like, despite the classic Beauty and the Beast story getting retold and retold in adaptation again on infinitum, and despite the years of Twilight being at the center of my pop culture in my childhood, all the don't judge a book by its cover gets washed away when a few dozen extra pairs of eyes start coming into the picture. Like, look at you guys, look at yourselves. Sure, it's not just fucking. Like, for all the aces out there, there's also monster lovers instead of monster fuckers, which is the less bluntly erotic version of monster fuckery. And at times I subscribe to this also. I mean, who hasn't had a moment of wanting to squeeze an eldritch horror's horrific multiple faces in their hands and tell them how much of a good boy they are? But for the purposes of comedy, though, and truth to the fact, if you're not a 6-foot-tall orc, don't even try and slide into my DMs. And demons inside me? More likely than you think. Okay, so people, when I usually get to this point, are like, what the fuck? So let me get you into my mind space. Close your eyes for a second. And imagine a slim being, ageless looking. They have a long spine, longer than you're thinking right now. They walk on all fours, mind. They've got big teeth, bigger than that. Their fangs barely fit in their mouth. They have absolutely enormous hands, perfect for cupping your face. Captivating eyes, black as oil, that shine when their owner speaks in an ancient, long-forgotten tongue. Their curly hair, long or short, depending on your preference, winds around horns that are covered in rings like an ancient tree. They have a tail, dealer's preference again. Anyways, they approach you quietly from behind, breathe on your neck, curl elongated fingers around your waist, delicate, but just enough strength to remind you that you can easily be torn apart. Just enough of a pinprick at the edge of a claw to scrape against the most thin outer layers of skin. They tower over you, lean into you, and you look up into their wet, empty, wide eyes. I should say that this whole idea of monster corporeality isn't the appeal of most monsters to everyone. Some, like the more inhuman, the incomprehensible, the kind of monsters where you look on them and it's kind of like seeing the moon eclipse the sun. Okay, so rewind. Scenario. Close your eyes again and ask yourself, have you ever seen the void? Oh, I know everyone has laid awake during nights and what feels like their darkest hours, or had one of those nights as a kid where you get up to go to the bathroom but you have to make it down the darkened hallway without stepping in the entryway of open doorways. We've all had darkness like that. We've all seen that. But that's just the absence of light, not the void. The void's something we joke about, yeah? Like stare into the abyss and the abyss stares back, oh, but it actually does. See, there's the briefest of moments when you dream or you fall deep into sleep. Those moments where it feels like true darkness is surrounding your entire being, but it's never a scary feeling. The weightlessness, lightless, noiseless void, it's a sentient being, and it's who you visit every time that you close your eyes. Even for just a few moments, you're in its home as its welcomed guest, and it watches curiously, wondering what types of dreams you might have. Do you always remember your dreams? What about the nights where you could swear up and down that you had a dream, but you don't remember it? Now, don't worry. That's the price you pay to visit the lonely void. It's so old and it's so vast, and it almost never has a real conversation, but it does adore its visitors. So much so that it will take your dreams every so often as a reminder of your time together. It's not malicious. It's not a malicious entity. It's quite the opposite, actually. It keeps an eye on those sleeping, attempting to wake many early if it knows that you need to be up for something urgent. It brings rest to those it can and attempts to soothe the sting of many nightmares that they can bring. A near constant companion with no expectation, no pressure, just the continuing assurance of inevitability. A break from the world at a time that stretches yawning out into the black. Now, doesn't that all just sound so sexy? Like, one thing I love about Monster Fuckers is our capacity to love characters that many have deemed unlovable. Like, the creators could scream and bang their fists on a table and says that, no, Pennywise is not supposed to be sexy. But that ain't gonna stop us Monster Fuckers. Like, it's very easy to relate to monsters when you're marginalized. We're kind of already taught to see monsters within ourselves, like our empathy, our fascination, the way we twist narratives and conventions to show otherworldly, non-human creatures in a more positive light, or to show them as desirable without diluting their ugliness, their otherness. It all feels very powerful. Queer people tend to identify with, love, and, are attracted to monsters because we too are driven to feel as though we are monstrous. I suppose it's natural then that Over the years, I've come to the realization that I'm more afraid of actual people than I am of monsters. If I came across a big, scary demon in a dark alleyway that would be sexy as hell, oh my god, I would take off my pants or my overalls, like, immediately. Now, if I came across, like, a cis-het-elo man in an alleyway, or hell, even a moderately lit footpath, hell no, keys and fists, running as fast as I can, get out, no. If I'm being honest, I fluctuate between a near constant feeling of, damn, I really want to snuggle that cryptid, and damn, I really want to be a cryptid. Like, imagine it. My motivation? Incomprehensible. My physical form? Incorporeal. My gender? Indecipherable. I would be a god. But about once a week, I get sad about the fact that there isn't an actual goddess out there who's willing to turn me into a gorgon, so my enemies can't look at me without immediately suffering the consequences. Snake hair or tentacles, I'm totally down for either. Speaking of tentacles, tentacle monsters get a bad rep. They're almost always written as monsters who take advantage of those around them. But who's to say that a tentacle monster couldn't be a tender lover? Who's to say that a person wouldn't willingly approach a tentacle monster to have healthy, consensual sex with them? Just think about it. Feeling the soft caress as the tentacles as they gently wind around your body, and the way they can reach places, wonk, where with an inhuman ease that feels so wonderfully intoxicating, you can't tell me that there isn't any appeal in that. Now, if I have to leave you off with one thought to take with you tonight as you go and visit the void, perhaps, it's this. Consentacles are the best kind of tentacles. This has been a PSA from me, a monster fucker.
Thank you so much to all of our wonderful artists, Liam Maguire, Robin Eames, Chloe Allison Escott, Gocklim Finch, and Jess Layton. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to host such a fabulous and talented group of people, and to be able to broadcast this evening from the unceded and stolen lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And thank you also to everyone who watched. It's fantastic to have you here, and I hope that you enjoyed watching these extremely monstrous folks laying themselves bare. Now, for all you night owls, we do have one more event tonight, our late night reading, which is at 1 a.m. called Easy Beats. It's going to be a properly delightful affair, I promise. But in the meantime, and speaking of extremely homoerotic monsters, my housemate's in the next room watching The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. So I have to go. This is a very important film for me. But we hope very much to see all of you tomorrow for National Young Writers Festival Day 4. Thank you very much, and see you soon.